Good morning, I'm Rowena Crosby.
And I'm Deborah Renner, and we're your co-hosts for this show. Thank you for joining us for the next 17 minutes for your IT show. No, we're not talking information technology, we're talking your Invisible Toolbox, the show that examines the tools for working effectively with people.
And today we're bringing you a pre-recorded version of our program. In the book, Your Invisible Toolbox, we're going to be in Chapter 5, and it's titled A New World of Citizen Journalism. And today, we're all journalists, and that's something that is very new for most of us. It's a new trend, it's a rising trend, and what the implications are for all of us in our professional and our personal lives are things we need to pay some keen attention to, and that's the focus of our show today.
But the recent technology of being able to report the news is not what we're going to look at. We're going to take a look at our individual use of our social media platforms and aligning those.
Absolutely. And whether it's a formal interview, a LinkedIn post, a Facebook post, a tweet, how we share information, what we share, and if we share at all is something for us to be thinking about.
And our invisible tool today is going to be a mantra to how to present ourselves in the best possible light.
And we are thrilled to welcome for the interview portion of our show a little later on a for real journalist who's going to give us some insight and also share with us a development challenge. And Dan Winters, those of you from Iowa will know him as an award-winning journalist and television anchor. He's also a member of the Tero consulting and coaching team.
So open up your Invisible Toolbox to Chapter 5, and after this program, you can open up all your social media platforms and reevaluate them.
And these days, we are tethered 24/7 to increasingly smaller and smaller devices that bring us increasingly large technological computing capabilities. The internet, its blogs, its search engines, its social media communities, they all put the power of information in the hands of ordinary people. And what is it that we do with that?
Many are finding out the hard way that communications that would be okay behind closed doors now go global, and it's not so okay. And this is our new normal. It's not changing anytime soon.
It isn't. And yet we're human beings. We all make mistakes in our actions, our behaviors, and our judgments. And what does that mean to our careers and to our lives when those mistakes go viral or global?
And they can be catastrophic. And oftentimes we don't even realize that that's the result. I remember when we were sitting in the back of a room, and it was a room of new hires. They were getting some training. Their leaders were in the back at tables, and the minute the information session started for the new hires, the leaders were going through each individual's Facebook page, and they were talking about them, and some things seemed to be okay, and some things seemed to be a caution. You remember that?
It was kind of like we had the ability to be a fly on the wall, and these leaders are in the back of the room checking out the social media communities of their new hires. And I don't know what was going on in their mind, but they were pointing at screens and pointing at individuals, and you knew careers and perceptions were being shaped there in real time.
And yet they're investing a lot in the new hires. They want to make sure the messaging is consistent in terms of who this person is, because the customer could go out and do that as well.
Exactly. And that's a lesson for all of us, because it isn't just the new hire. If you're serving customers, if you're a vendor, they certainly can go out there. And we've often thought, well, our Facebook page, that's personal, and our LinkedIn page, that's professional. But a casual Google search of your name is going to bring all of it up.
Yeah, and that surveillance doesn't really start when you go to work. I mean, parents are really monitoring their children's use of social media as well. But when we get to work, it has some different implications.
It absolutely does. Gosh, now we're surveilling people, even their physical space. You can tell which parking lot somebody's in now, so it's really changing the way we interact.
It's changing, and it's challenging because there's a permission to really put anything out there. Mm-hmm. Put any tweet out there, put any post out there. There's really a social permission to do that. And yet once it's out there forever. I remember getting a lesson as a child of never to say things that I didn't want to have come back to me in terms of that I said it. And the analogy was, it's like taking a pillow to the top of a hillside, opening it up, and having the feathers go, and you have to go collect each one. And that was the imagery given to me. You can't collect each one online. They're there forever.
Yeah, when we were little people and our parents were teaching us those lessons, who would have contemplated that those feathers were going to go global?
And so many millennials too, the trend now is they say the fear of missing out. And so things are posted, and in order to join that conversation or keep up with that conversation, a lot of times people post things that they really didn't examine well and maybe regret later.
Absolutely. And what's posted online, is that even our authentic self? That's going to be a conversation we have a little bit later on. We're putting things out there that have an afterlife.
Well, let's take a look at our invisible tool of the week, because it's going to help with this. And it is in Chapter 5.
It is Chapter 5. The tool itself is called Consider the Consequences. And the consequences of our actions are exemplified through all of the stories that we have. And we're going to share with you the story that's in the book, but invite you to think about the stories you know of consequences, unintended ones. And this relates to Iowa Representative Bruce Braley, and he was running for the U.S. Senate seat that was being vacated by retiring Senator Tom Harkin. And he was at an event in Texas and made the following statement. He talked about Senator Chuck Grassley as a farmer who grew up in Iowa and who never went to law school. And you would think that might be a seemingly innocuous comment. It absolutely trashed his chances to win the Senate race, and that seat is now held by U.S. Senator Joni Ernst.
Wow.
One comment that
That
was received and interpreted and ruined his career chances. He probably never contemplated that.
Well, and then think of the consequences of a comment that goes viral, that is
Well, that
going
one
to be
did.
seen by that one did. But, you know, we have a great example. I know that Dan has a great example he uses in coaching that we may hear about later that
Yeah.
just devastated someone in their career.
Absolutely.
So we got to think about those things. But before we get into talking a little bit more about that, let's take a look at our social media posts for the week. We post things every day, relevant interpersonal skills topics for you on all social media platforms. And Ro, will you share the first post?
I would be delighted. So our first featured post this week is NPR, and it's titled Why Social Media Isn't Always Social, and it has to do with motivation, and that's a factor in all of our behavior. Individuals can be motivated on what they share on social media and things that they shouldn't perhaps share, in the spirit of the fear of missing out, this FOMA thing that Deb was talking about earlier. That's going to be posted on all Tero social media platforms today.
And is there a risk if you're not on social media platforms? There's an article, the risks of using social media in business, that actually challenges us that we have to be out there. We just have to be out there appropriately. And this really speaks to individuals as well. This is going to be posted on all Tero social media platforms on Thursday.
Well, now we're moving to the segment of the program we call This Week's Interview, and we are so delighted to welcome our guest, Dan Winters.
Hello.
And Dan is going to join us for a discussion on this whole citizen journalism thing.
I'm sure we'll tackle it all.
We
Give it
will,
time.
absolutely. And so you'll recognize Dan, perhaps some of you will, from his work on WHO TV. So welcome, Dan. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you
Pleased
so
to
much
have you
for
here
having
with us.
me.
Thank you for being here.
Good to see you both, as always.
Well, could you tell the viewers, before we get started on this discussion, a little bit about your background and your passion for coaching?
Sure. Well, right now, I'll start with currently what I'm up to is anchoring 3 newscasts each and every day, 5 days a week, for the local NBC affiliate here in Des Moines, Iowa. I've spent 20 years in broadcast news, started in radio, then made the switch to television, developed an online following. I've interviewed thousands of people over the years, and been blessed to do so. Presidents, politicians, entertainers, criminals. Hopefully they're not overlapping. We know in some cases they do.
Yes.
And my passion for coaching really comes from that passion for journalism, gathering facts, giving voice to the voiceless. And so I feel a responsibility. A lot of people tense up and get put off by the opportunity to engage with the media or engage with journalists. And so I feel a responsibility to pull back the curtain a little bit, to educate what journalism and the media are all about, how they're similar, how they're different, and then also to give people tools that I've acquired over the years to help them say as much as possible, as impactfully as possible, in as little time as possible,
Yes.
so that they're making the most of those interactions.
Oh, that's fabulous to be able to do that. And in doing that, do you also address their social presence online and things that could go wrong if they don't consider the consequences there?
Oh, absolutely. It's paramount these days, as you've just given examples. I would say the biggest ramification of not using social media properly is the total and utter annihilation of your personal and private life.
Yeah, we've seen so many examples of that.
Yeah, let's just think about the name Anthony Weiner.
Yeah.
And
Enough
how
said.
his use of one device totally destroyed his personal and professional life. As a matter of fact, with upload coaching, which we developed from scratch here at Tero to try to walk people through these things on an individual basis, and to give them the tools they need to navigate all of these platforms, I ask all of our clients to do a little pre-work where they read an article about people whose lives were destroyed irreparably by one bad tweet or one bad Facebook post. And it really gives them, informs them of what's at stake when they show up for some coaching. I would say secondly, but just as importantly, are missed opportunities.
Yes.
We never know what sort of opportunities we're missing because a possible mentor, a person of influence has seen what we're all about online and hasn't liked it and hasn't wanted to associate with it. Those are the kinds of things that ought to keep people up at night.
Absolutely, and that can really hurt people's careers and their business opportunities.
Well, how can the average person contribute meaningfully to journalism, media, and the news process itself?
I'm so glad you asked that, Deb, because it's what I'm passionate about and it's what I do every day. First of all, people can contribute by starting to be good consumers, by relying on reputable organizations and individuals to deliver them the news. People, we talk about citizen journalists. That doesn't mean someone who's been trained in journalism, the practice of it,
Right.
and more importantly, the ethics of it.
Yes.
And so being good consumers of a broad variety of well-respected journalistic outlets, then also making yourself available, making yourself a well-informed, eager, values-driven person of integrity who can pipe up when called upon and say, lend your expertise, lend your perspective to any number of conversations where there's a demand for that information.
Right.
Well, what are the common mistakes people make when they are interviewed? Because you've worked with our clients, they might be interviewed at a trade show, by a board. What are some
Yeah,
common
it's not
mistakes?
always TV.
No.
Right, absolutely. I would say first and foremost, never getting around to answering the question that was asked.
So annoying.
Isn't it frustrating when you
Yes.
see, for example, the Sunday morning talk shows?
Yes. And people, I think, have been coached not to answer the question. They come in with their talking points and
Right. And by not answering the question, aren't they answering the question?
yes.
I would submit that they are. Other things are just simple objective things like wearing clothing that you can't clip a microphone to, or wearing jewelry that's banging against the microphone and creating a
Right.
distraction. Wandering away from the topic, or going into an interview not with a heart of service to journalism or to the topic at hand, but with some sort of agenda where you're trying to sell somebody on something.
Why is individual coaching such a good fit for learning these things and being able to explore them and get better?
Well, I would say, first of all, and you may not want to hear this, but it's not. It's not for everybody. Individual coaching is important for individuals who are people of action, because we've devised this from scratch upload training. It's holistic, and it takes into account all the nuances that an individual will need to address in their interactions with journalists and the media. We do a lot of pre-work to identify what those things are. And then we tailor the coaching experience to those needs. And the only way it works is if they follow through on what we know works.
Absolutely. So don't call us for the crisis. Call us if you're more planful.
Absolutely. I think those words come out of our mouths.
Absolutely.
Well, would you share with our viewers a development challenge? Every week we challenge them to change a habit. So could you help them with that this week?
Yeah, how about starting with your social media presence?
That'd be
Perfect.
good.
That's
It
right on
matters to
target for
everybody.
today.
So I'm going to challenge you this week to spend 5 minutes, make that a time investment to really go and look at your social media presence objectively across all platforms, Facebook, Twitter, Instagram, Snapchat, and decide if you were looking at that for the first time, would you see the same person in each of those places? Is one of those platforms a reflection of you that's less responsible, more on the weekend, more on the fun side? Is another one of those, conversely, a little more stuffy or too unapproachable? Think about how to make yourself line up. It's about consistency and integrity and both of those go hand in hand. Also, you need to edit. That's the next step. It's not enough to recognize. The next step is to take action and go through and modify how you're being perceived on these platforms. Keep in mind, Facebook's been around for over 10 years.
It's hard to believe.
My development question for you this week is, do all of those photos from college translate into the responsible professional you've grown into today?
Yeah, it could be a new audience today than who we were trying to communicate to 10 years ago.
Thank you so much for sharing that.
Thank you for
Yes,
having me.
Thank you so much. And thanks to all of you for joining us today. If you missed any portion of the program or you'd like to share it with others, you'll find the entire program loaded up to Tero's YouTube channel. Join us again next Monday morning at 9:03 Central Time, where we'll explore another tool in your Invisible Toolbox. And if this topic is as enchanting to you as it is to us, you'll actually find several chapters in here that are around this same topic. Check out Chapter 29 and check out Chapter 100.
And now it's your turn. We welcome your suggestions for future shows. Email your ideas to ideas@yourinvisibletooolbox.com, and you can meet us on any of your favorite social media platforms, and we're also now on Instagram. And we'd like to express a thank you to Kyle Plummer, our cameraman and director.
And thanks again to Dan Winters for
Yes.
joining us today.
Thanks for having me.
Thanks for all of you, and that's a wrap.